And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Julie Burns. I'm President and CEO of the RIZE Massachusetts Foundation, and welcome to the Mosaic Opioid Recovery and Remediation Fund Community Grant Program. We're thrilled to have you here with us today, and if we could go to the next slide, please. Great, thank you. I'd like to spend just a quick minute covering what we're going to do today. Then we're going to take a moment for reflection. We'll give an overview of the type of grants that RIZE is offering through this grant program, go through the application requirements, how to submit a grant, how the grants will be evaluated, and then spend some time talking about grant writing best practices. And of course, we'll leave plenty of time to answer your questions during Q&A. Please feel free to share comments in the chat throughout the webinar. And if you'd like to submit a question for us to answer during the Q&A portion, please submit it in the Q&A box. We'll cover as many submitted questions as we possibly can at the end of the webinar. And anything that we don't get to answer today, you can always reach us at grants@rizema.org. Next slide, please. At this time, I'd like us to take a moment to reflect on the lives lost during the overdose crisis. If you'd like to put a name in the chat so that we can all reflect and remember those that have been lost, or if you'd like to just sit quietly for a moment, I invite you to do that. It's important that we do this at all of our meetings related to this funding, because this funding is related to remediation for the harms that were caused by the overdose crisis. So thank you, Martha McDonald, for getting us started. And if anyone else would like to post a name, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for allowing us that moment. Next slide, please. Great. Now we're going to get into an overview of the grant program that we're here to talk about today. Next slide, please. So the Mosaic Opioid Recovery Partnership, funded by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health Bureau of Substance Addiction Services and powered by RIZE Massachusetts Foundation, is a unique public-private partnership designed to fund nonprofits and municipalities that are addressing the opioid crisis in communities and populations that have been historically underserved and have experienced a high rate of opioid-related deaths. Shaped by the Commonwealth and powered by RIZE's commitment to innovation and guided by people with lived and living experience, Mosaic is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to lift up and bring together the best and most promising ideas to save lives, end stigma, and improve quality of life for people living with substance use disorder. For those of you that don't know about RIZE Massachusetts Foundation, we are a statewide organization founded in 2017 and are solely dedicated to ending the overdose crisis here in our state. We do our work in mainly three ways. We invest in community programs all across the Commonwealth. We've invested in over 100 organizations since our inception. We fund research, and we also build inclusive networks. But what we're here today to talk about is our grant making, and I want to take a minute to thank the Department of Public Health and the Haley Driscoll administration for putting their faith in RIZE to deliver this particular grant program. Next slide, please. So there are some pretty high expectations that we have set for ourselves, along with our partners in state government, for these grants. We intend to design and implement initiatives that impact opioid use disorder in communities by centering the voices of those most impacted. We want to make sure that with every step we take, from designing the application to providing information about the application process and actually awarding the grants and supporting the funded grantees, we want to make sure that our work reflects the input of communities, addresses disparities in existing services and improves equity, addresses co-occurring mental health conditions, substance use disorders, and other behavioral health needs that occur together with opioid use disorder, leverages programs and services already that are already up and running. We don't want to reinvent the wheel here. We want to make sure that we're working collaboratively and we're not duplicating or complicating anything already underway. And then we definitely want to encourage innovation, fill gaps, and fix the shortcomings of existing approaches. Next slide, please. So in order to achieve all of those expectations, we have some guiding principles that we will follow to help launch this program. As I mentioned before, we will center the voice of people with lived and living experience. We'll ensure that our efforts from A to Z are informed by a commitment to inclusion, equity, and compassion. We will work to reduce stigma in all of our efforts, and we will advocate for approaches that support people in understanding and achieving their own goals regarding harm reduction, treatment, and recovery. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Jen Tracy, Chief Program Officer at RIZE Massachusetts, to tell us about the specific round of grants. Jen?
Great. Thank you, Julie, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to start talking about the first round of the Mosaic Opioid Recovery Partnership, and that is the community-based opioid response efforts, the CORE program, which is what we are here to talk about today. The primary goal of CORE is to help organizations deepen their impact, bring their work to scale, and build a strong and sustainable infrastructure to meet the needs of the populations they serve. Next slide. RIZE will award $3.75 million over 3 years. The grants will provide general operating support with a focus on capacity building. The 3-year grants will range from $50,000 to $150,000 annually, depending on the organization's size and budget. Next slide. So this program is specifically targeting grassroots organizations with an annual operating budget up to $250,000. They will be eligible to apply for up to $50,000 per year, or 30% of their annual operating budget. It's also targeting small organizations, $250,000 to $1 million of an annual operating budget, who will be eligible to apply for up to $100,000 per year, or 30% of their annual operating budget. And medium-sized organizations with an annual operating budget of $1 million to $5 million, who will be eligible to apply for up to $150,000 per year. Because this program is targeting grassroots, small and medium organizations, organizations with total annual budgets over $5 million are not eligible for this round. Next slide, please. Julie mentioned some of this on the overall program, and Anne-Marie, when she walks through the application, will hit on some of this as well. But RIZE seeks to fund organizations that clearly explain their mission, population served, and services provided, articulate clear goals for the next 3 to 5 years, and explain how these specific funds will help achieve those goals, sustain activities and services. Always, you will hear over and over again that RIZE seeks to fund organizations that serve populations and communities with high rates of opioid overdoses and deaths in those communities that have been underserved, and deliver programs and services that reflect the input of communities, centering the voices of those with lived and living experience, and always organizations that have a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide. In addition, organizations should have a 501c3 nonprofit status or use a 501c3 fiscal sponsor, as well as be up to date and in compliance with all state and federal reporting requirements. Next slide. How funds can be used. Next slide. These funds are targeting general operating support to help build capacity, stabilize, and help organizations move towards sustainability. 3-year general operating support grants will provide unrestricted funding that can be used for any purpose, including paying salaries, rent, utilities, other essential expenses for the organization's functioning. These grants can help organizations sustain their operations for paying for basic costs or capacity improvements not covered by traditional project grants or restricted funding. And the hope is that the longer term 3-year funding will allow organizations to allocate resources where they're most needed, making room for innovation, emergence, and impact. Next slide. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Anne Marie, to walk through the application and the application requirements. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anne Marie Pagliano, Associate Program Officer here at RIZE, and I'm here to let you know what the application looks like, what we're expecting, and what you can expect if you're awarded. Next slide, please. Just to give you an outline of what we're talking about and our timing, just to let you know, the application is open right now. You can apply today. As you can see on the slide here, we are in the webinar, the introductory webinar. We will have 3 additional webinars over the next 3 weeks, 1 week, which we're calling office hours. And that's a place where you can come and ask any question you have in a live interactive format, so that you can work your way through the application with as much help as you need. The application is due on June 14th at midnight. That's a Friday night. We will award the grants and make the announcement on July 30th, and the grant period will begin on August 1. Next slide, please. So what I want you to remember more than anything is if you have a question about the application, contact us, please. We are here to help. And all the information you could possibly want about our application is on our website. So remember our website, rizema.org. Your grant application guidelines are going to be there, the application itself, the questions, if you want to use them to work on before you actually click into the application, registration for those office hours, those webinars where you can come in and ask your questions, that's on our website. You can find ways to contact us. And again, that would be best through email. That's grants@rizema.org. Ask us your questions through the website. That's going to be your home base for all of your information. I'm going to now, in just a couple of minutes, show you what the application looks like and what questions we're asking. But before I do that, I just want to mention that when you submit your application, we're going to ask for 2 documents in addition to the answers to your questions. One is your annual operating budget of the year we are in right now. Just upload that. And the other thing is an audited financial statement for the most recent year completed, if you have one. If you don't have one, you can submit a profit and loss statement. If you don't have that, email us and we'll work with you to figure it out. Okay. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about submitting the application. Next slide. As I mentioned, they're due on June 14th. We'll get there. But what you should remember is that the application itself, again, is found on our website. There's a big orange box. You click on it and it will take you into a form, which I'm going to show you in just a second. And that's where you fill in the application and upload those 2 documents I just mentioned. Again, email us with questions. We will get back to you within 48 hours. And we're putting together a frequently asked questions list. So if your question comes into us, we will put it on that list, so that other folks can check that out and see if their question has been asked before, and will help us all stay on track. So I'm going to now switch over to our actual application questions. This is what the application is going to look like. When you click on the box on our website, it will take you to a page where you put in your name and organizational information, and then you'll click through to these questions. And I just want to walk through them so we all know what they're all about. And you may have many questions about them. Again, put them in the Q&A here today, or come to the office hours or email us. And we'll be glad to answer anything, help you out, whatever we can do to make this easier. So you'll see here, this is our application. It's just one scrolling page. At the top, we're asking you how much you would like to apply for. Jen laid out the sizes of grants you can apply for. There'll be a lot of questions about that, and we can help you sort that out. But here we want to know what the total amount is you're applying for, and that is a total over 3 years. So if you're applying for $50,000 a year, let's say, in this box, that number should be $150,000. Okay, so it's your 3-year total. We scroll up just a bit, please. Then we're going to have keep going, scroll down, I should say. Should I say scroll down? Anyway, then you're going to have some boxes where we're asking where are you working in the Commonwealth, what services you provide, and what your target populations are that you serve. And that's just to help us get a sense of where and what you do. Then we ask you some questions. There's 3 sections, only 3. The first one is about your organization. Now, remember, this is funding for general operating support. So all of these questions we want answered through the lens of what your organization does, not a specific program, but your whole organization. We want to know your mission statement, if you have one. If you don't, email us, we'll help you. The second question, we want you to describe the services that you provide. What do you do every day? Tell us about it. Tell us your story. The third question is more information about the population you serve. Introduce them to us. Let us know who they are and any details about them. And if you have metrics around who you serve, we'd love to know that as well. That's what goes in this box. So those 3 questions are about your organization, what you do every day, and why you do it. The second section is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's really important in this grant program that that is part of what we do and how we look at services delivered. So we've got 3 questions here. One is, how does your organization ensure that its programs and services are accessible and equitable to your community members? So we want to know what you do, what do you actually do to make them accessible and equitable to everyone you want to reach? The second question under diversity is, how does your organization ensure that the voices of the people that you serve inform how your program is structured and delivered? So how exactly do you take those voices, the inputs from your community, and how does that impact how you do what you do? And the third question is about your own organization. We want to know what steps you've taken to make your organization a more inclusive work environment. So how have you applied those principles to yourself? Then we have a third section, and this is really talking about the future. So we want to understand what your organization's top 3 to 5 goals are for the next 3 years. Where are you today? Where do you want to be in 3 years? Tell us about that. Tell us what you want to do. And then the second question under this section is, how will this grant let you do that? What will the money from this grant allow you to pay for and to do that will let you achieve that goal, will let you get to where you want to be in 3 years? Okay, so those are the questions. That's it. That's the entire application. And then we want you to upload those 2 files I mentioned, the audited financial and the budget, your operating budget for the year. You submit it. And to give you just a snapshot of what our process is after that, we can go back to the slides. Those applications come in, RIZE takes a look, make sure everybody's eligible to apply. Then we put together, oh yeah, we can go to the next slide, actually. Thank you. Thank you. This is about making our decisions. We're putting together review teams right now. They're teams of 3. Those teams will include people who have lived and living experience or family members, subject matter expertise, and or a very close understanding of diversity, equity, inclusion. We want those people to be reading the applications. Depending on the number of applications that come in, we'll put them in groups, and each application group goes to a reviewer team. Every application will be scored against the same scorecard and rubric, which will give each application a score, a numeric score. Those applications come back to RIZE, and then we make sure we put our lenses of equitable geographical spread, population served, overdose rates, and types of services over those scores, just to make sure that we have a good distribution of funds. And then we make our decisions. And what we can say now is that we don't know how many grants we're going to be awarding, because that will be based on the number of applicants and the size of the grant requests. And the last thing I want to share with you, next slide, please, is what we expect if you receive an award. Really, it's 3 things. 1, that you keep doing what you're doing and doing it excellently, because that's why you've got the award. We want to ask you to communicate with us. So the calls that we ask you to do, maybe attend a convening, meet with your cohort members. And we want you to share what you learn. We're confident that everyone's going to learn something about themselves and about how we all do this work. So we ask that you are open to share learning and sharing across the cohort and beyond, perhaps. And to facilitate that, we have an outside evaluator who's going to be working with all of the awarded grantees on that very thing. So I'm going to turn it over now to Ranjani Paradis to talk more about the evaluation.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Hi, everyone. My name is Ranjani Paradis. I'm from the Institute for Community Health, and we are the external evaluation partner for the Mosaic Opioid Recovery Partnership. So what I'm going to do in just a couple minutes is give a quick summary of what the evaluation is going to look like for this core grant program. Next slide, please. So first of all, our team at ICH takes a participatory approach to evaluation. So what that means here is that we'll be working with the grantees and with RIZE to figure out what's most important to measure here and how can we do that in a way that's feasible for all of the participating organizations. We understand that staff are really busy, especially at grassroots and small organizations, and we don't want evaluation to take away from the important work that you're doing every day. So on our end, we will do our best to align the evaluation with information that you're already collecting and make sure that it's not too time intensive to meet the requirements. So just to give a sense of what you can expect, what we'll be asking for. First, we'll be asking grantees to complete a short progress report each year. That would be using a template that we'll provide for you. So that report is really a space to share updates, successes, things you're proud of, as well as challenges, barriers that you've encountered, maybe places where your initial plans have shifted or you've made adaptations, as well as areas where you would like technical assistance support to help advance your organizational goals. We also will want to get feedback after specific grant activities so that we can hear how well the process is working for everybody. So for example, Anne-Marie was just saying there may be convenings or grantee learning events throughout the 3-year grant period. So when those types of things happen, we will ask the participants to fill out a feedback survey, that type of thing, so that we can hear thoughts and feedback, experiences about things that were effective about those activities and also things that didn't work so well for you. All of that information is really helpful so that the team here can identify ways to keep improving the program over time. And then the last thing to be aware of is that we may ask some grantees to participate in qualitative interviews. So what that would look like is conversations with the evaluation team, maybe once or twice over the 3-year period. Each interview would be about an hour of time from the grantee. And this is an opportunity to really talk in detail, more in depth about your experiences and perspectives, and for us to really hear your stories of impact and what you've been working on and the things that you've accomplished. So on that note, the last thing I want to say here is just talk a little bit about the types of impacts that we are really interested in for this core grant program. Because this funding is for general operating support, we're going to be focusing on understanding how the funding helps build organizational capacity. So that means we'll want to learn things like, does the funding help organizations grow or become more sustainable? Does it help organizations improve their operations or develop systems that make their work more effective or more efficient? So it's really focusing in on those organizational sustainability or capacity or growth outcomes. Those are the types of things that we'll want to be learning about with the evaluation. So that's everything I'm going to say here. Happy to answer any questions related to evaluation when we get to the Q&A. And for now, I'm going to pass it on to Kristen, who will talk about some grant writing tips and best practices.
Thank you so much, Ranjani. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Paquette, the CEO at C4 Innovations, and we are so pleased to be a partner to RIZE on Mosaic. For the next few minutes, we wanted to offer some best practice tips for preparing and writing your application. As you can probably tell, our hope is to reach grassroots, community-based organizations that may not have had a chance to write or win many grants before. And we know the process can be really overwhelming, especially if you're feeling pressure to get funding and find that next grant. If you find yourself in this room as a seasoned grant writer, welcome, and please share your best tips in the chat so others can hear from you as well. Just to share a little bit about myself and why I'm speaking to this part, I have been somebody who spent many years terrified of grant writing, but somehow have been doing it for the better part of 20 years. And I see it as a constant learning experience and happy to pass along some of what we've developed as best practices for our team over those years. Next slide, please. So again, I just want to start by kind of acknowledging that feeling of maybe not knowing where to begin or feeling like, who am I to be writing this grant for my organization? We might even feel a little bit of imposter syndrome as we start this work. Even for those of us who are seasoned grant writers, every proposal is new and different. Every funder or funding round has its own requirements, and it's always very hard work to do that well. For some of us, the writing process itself can feel really daunting. Maybe we don't love to write, or we feel insecure about how well we write. What matters typically in grant writing is how you convey your ideas for reviewers, and especially keeping in mind that reviewers tend to be reviewing many, many similar proposals at the same time. Let's also remember that everybody who has figured out how to write successful grants started with their first one and then their second one, and probably many more after that. Before you put pen to paper and try to write that first paragraph or response, one suggestion is to find a way that works for you to get your ideas out of your head and just start mapping and shaping and getting some input on them. I personally love working on a big whiteboard to get my thinking out. You might put some papers up around your living room or Post-it notes on your floor, talk it out with a colleague, or even open up your cell phone and start recording some ideas. You might be really surprised at what you can get out at these early stages of the process without the pressure of sitting down to write the application. And finding that process that works for you is important to help you to think clearly, so that eventually you can write your ideas clearly, and then a reviewer can follow along and get excited about what you've shared. When you do come across moments of doubt, which will always happen, find a way to ground yourself back in the incredible work that you're doing every day, and knowing that you and your organization are truly changing lives, saving lives in your community. And that is at the heart of what you're proposing to do, and what you want to get across first and foremost to reviewers. So what is so special about you and your organization and what you do? And how will the funding help you to have an even bigger impact? And again, just to reiterate, ask questions. Don't waste time guessing or trying to interpret something you don't understand. For this round of grants, you can email grants@rizemass.org, and the answers will be posted on the website. It's really important to our team that we provide the information that everybody needs to be successful. And it's really also important to our commitment to equitable and transparent grant making opportunities in this process. Next slide, please. So you may be focused on what you need to write a winning proposal, but a good plan is just as essential, and taking the time to plan at the early stages will reduce confusion, stress, and possibly burnout. Chances are this is not the only grant that you'll write this year, and these good systems for planning purposes can really help to ease that burden and the risk of burnout over time for you and your team. So we need to think about all the little deadlines that will get us to that really big deadline of when the proposal's due. We want to be clear with our team members. Do they know what's expected of them? Are you sure that somebody's not heading out on vacation and won't be available if you need something at the last minute? I know some of these things might sound really basic, but these are the details that, if they're not planned out, can create last minute emergencies and really put your application and all your hard work at risk. When you think about your plan, you also want to think about the stages of writing that are needed, and put those into your plan. So again, starting with that big messy idea mapping might come first. Then when you're ready, move into a first draft. I like to think of that as a no judgment first draft. Get it out on paper. Don't worry about polishing it. Ask some trusted reviewers to review for you and offer you feedback. And if that's uncomfortable for you to accept that feedback, talk about how you can get the feedback in a way that you can hear it and feels comfortable and safe for you, so that you can improve your application. And then once you have honed those drafts, maybe many times over, you can worry about some of the finishing aspects like copy editing, fixing those typos, looking at your spelling and grammar, checking word count limits, and things like that. Next slide, please. So show, don't tell is a favorite tip of mine. I can personally remember seeing it written in red pen on my high school English papers. But what does this mean? It means that we're really all playing in the same space here, doing similar work in some way, is aiming to reduce overdose deaths and related consequences of substance use. So when we work on an application like this, we need to remember that easily 50 or 100 other applicants are probably saying things like, we provide critical services to our community. We are the best resource in our community for people seeking help. We support people in their pathway to recovery. And of course, that's absolutely 100% true, but How are you doing this? What is your unique approach? Do you have specific stories of individuals you can share? Do you have data, even if it's informal data, that really shows why people choose your program to refer their loved ones? So think about kind of painting that picture. What will it take for your words to come off the page and for a reviewer to see and maybe even feel what it is that you do and why you should be funded to do more of that? Next slide, please. Before we move into some examples of writing strong goals for your application, I just want to remind us again that this first round of funding is intended for operating grants. And this is incredibly unique, as most funding opportunities are for specific program models, services, or populations as designated by a funder. But with these Mosaic core funds, applicants are expected to use the funds in ways that are less restricted and can be in service of various organizational needs. So keep this in mind when crafting your proposal and your goals. Next slide, please. We like to use the framework of SMARTY goals as a recommended way to think about developing your goals. Some of you may be familiar with SMARTY goals, or maybe at least the SMART framework, which is the foundation of this acronym SMARTY. But both frameworks kind of push us to think and write with intention and with enough detail so that we envision what we need, how we'll get there, and how we and others will know when we're successful. So you can see the first 5 letters for the SMART part stands for specific, measurable, action-oriented, relevant, and time-bound or time-specific. I've seen a few versions of these acronyms out in the world. So sometimes I see the A also stand for ambitious, which encourages us to think boldly as change makers. And sometimes I see the R as realistic. So recognizing we all want to change the world, but what is the real first step for us in our own communities? And then from here, the SMARTY framework has evolved to ensure that there is an I for inclusive and E for equitable as we craft those goals. Next slide, please. So why do we add an I and E to the SMARTY framework? This really pushes us to think deeply about the how of the work that we're going to do. So the SMARTY framework is about shifting the emphasis toward inclusion, really with the goal of shifting power in terms of who's at the table, whose voices matter, and how that truly influences decisions and resources, some things that really get at the heart of equity and doing things differently. So for an example, say your organization is at a developmental stage of wanting to build out a board of directors that can help you grow and better meet your mission in the years ahead. Generally, you might say to your leadership team, in the next year, our goal is to improve the organization's board of directors. And of course, that's a very important goal for a lot of nonprofits, right? But the SMART framework would push us to get into some of those specific details that are measurable, actionable, relevant, time-bound. So how big do we want to grow the board? Now it has 4 members. We'd like it to have 8 members. When will we do it? We think we can accomplish that by the end of year 2. So that gets a little clearer. But what if we took it one step further? As community-based organizations that are committed to equity and to serving all community members, we might really need to think more about how we are approaching this board expansion in this example. So who's on the board now? Who's represented? Who's missing? What do the power and decision-making structures look like? How can we make sure that this is not only an effort of diversifying faces and voices, but ensuring that there is an inclusive decision-making process where we share power with people who've been underrepresented and have been harmed? So maybe our goal might then start to look like this SMARTY goal: confirm 4 new board members by the end of year 2, but with advisory and decision-making support from a dedicated group of service recipients and existing board members that are representative of community demographics and lived experiences. So you start to see some of those shifts in the SMARTY goal. We're saying this is not just the job of an executive director or a board chair to run out and find a bunch of new board members. We want to really approach it in a different way with intention and equity. Next slide, please. So as we map out our goals and our main ideas, we then move into writing. And these are just, again, some tips to keep in mind. You do want to be aware of the word counts from the beginning for the responses on the application. If a word count for a response is 500 words, we don't want to spend weeks writing a perfect 3-page draft, because then what we have to do is basically rewrite it when it comes time to paste those answers into the application form. You want to keep your writing concise, to the point, short and clear, active sentences. We say what we will do, not just what will happen if we get the funds. For basic editing and production, you can definitely make use of tools like the basics, Microsoft Word spelling and grammar check, or artificial intelligence tools like Grammarly to do some of that checking for you. We certainly don't recommend using AI tools like Grammarly or ChatGPT to kind of do the heavy lifting of writing your proposal, but these tools can be tremendously helpful in things like word choice and doing that spelling and grammar checking before you submit. I do want to also acknowledge that the Mosaic review team will not be looking for ways to take away points just for spelling and grammar errors and typos and things like that. We welcome and support applications from people with a wide range of skills, but we also want to acknowledge that reviewers are human beings, and making your application as clear as possible will ultimately serve you in the review and scoring process. And having at least one person do a final proof behind you, that's kind of one of our golden rules at C4 Innovations. Even for our seasoned writers, it always helps to have a second set of eyes. Next slide, please. So as you make your way through the final edits, you do want to kind of zoom back out at some point before the deadline and make sure you've tended to all the important pieces and steps. Maybe even make yourself a proposal checklist with questions like, did we answer everything? Do we have all the attachments ready? Will reviewers find our application organized and clear, or are they going to have to hunt around for answers? Have we been specific and actionable? Have we used our SMARTY goals to guide our work? Have we gotten input and review, checked spelling and grammar, cited any data or research that we're using? And does the budget match what we are saying that we will do? Next slide, please. So hopefully those are just some helpful things to keep in mind as you embark on your application process. But before we open up some time for Q&A, just a few final reminders. Please ask those questions, submit them to grants@rizemass.org, look for the answers on the RIZE website. You can also bring your questions to one of 3 upcoming office hours sessions. So you can see the dates and times here, and there are registration links now on the RIZE website as well. And then if you're interested in learning more about some of these grant writing best practice tips or SMARTY goal development, you'll also find a resource list posted on the RIZE Mosaic website as well. Next slide, please. So with that, we are going to open it up for Q&A. I know we had a few questions come in already, so we'll start with those. If you still do have questions, please enter them into the Q&A area so we can be sure to see them, and we will answer as many as possible before the end of the hour together. So to start us off, I know that I saw a few questions come in around eligibility, where some folks on this call have applied for other RIZE grant-making competitions and want to ensure that that doesn't preclude anybody from applying for Mosaic grants, and would love if somebody from the RIZE team could just jump in on that question.
Sure, Kristen, it's Julie here. Happy to answer that one. Yes, you are definitely eligible, even if you have a current RIZE grant or have received a grant from RIZE in the past.
Excellent. Thanks, Julie. This might be another one for you about a couple of questions related to financial eligibility. So somebody has acknowledged that their operating budget has grown pretty significantly by 91% due to an increase in COVID federal dollars, and has pushed them over that $5 million limit for this round of grant making. But knowing that those relief funds will be expiring at the end of the year, is there room to apply?
That's a very interesting and specific question, and I think we would want to take a look back at your history, and when you received the COVID funds, how big your organization is, and then where you'll be going forward. So whoever submitted that one, please get in touch with us, and we can do a little bit more due diligence with you. But I would expect that yes, if your COVID funds are time limited and going away, that you would be eligible to apply.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Another eligibility question, and I imagine many folks are wondering something similarly, is an organization that sits under a parent organization, where the parent organization might hit that limit or exceed that limit of $5 million, but the organization within it would not. Could you advise on that question?
I can try. If it's a chapter of a national organization, I think that was one of the questions that came up. So if it's a Massachusetts chapter of a national organization, that would be acceptable because it's very similar to having a fiscal agent. If it's a program within an institution, so a program as opposed to a chapter, if everyone understands that distinction, would not be eligible to apply unless they were using a fiscal agent.
Great. Will there be future funding opportunities for organizations with a larger than $5 million annual budget?
That is definitely on the table. I think as Jen mentioned, we're doing 3 rounds of funding between now and spring of 2025. The second round of funding in the fall will be based on with a matching program with municipalities. And then the third round of funding, which we hope to launch in January 2024 for funding in the 25, sorry, for funding in the spring. We are using this program as a pilot to see if we are actually successful in targeting the small organizations, and if there is an interest and will to expand the pool a little bit, we can certainly consider that for the third round.
Great. A question about emphasis. Somebody noted that their programming spans several different services, and addressing opioid use disorder and substance use disorder is just one of them. Would it be better for the application to hone in on those specific services, or still keep it general as funding all the programs overall, as you've outlined here in the webinar?
Also a great question. I think it's really important for you to tell us what you do and how the work that you do is in response to the goals of the program. So we are obviously being funded by the opioid settlement funds that are supposed to reduce the harms of the overdose epidemic. And if you go on our website, the allowable activities for funding are there. There's resources links, as well as the strategic plan for the opioid recovery and remediation fund. And I would just strongly suggest you to take a quick look at it and make sure that whatever you're presenting is in line with the strategic plan and the allowable activities.
Great. Another services related question: does this opportunity fund harm reduction programs such as needle exchanges?
Yes.
Okay.
That's an easy one. Yes.
Great. Could a national organization that is doing work in Massachusetts apply?
No, I don't believe so. I think we said Massachusetts-based 501c3s.
Okay. So the incorporation would have to be in Massachusetts.
Yes, in Massachusetts. Yep.
Question on the application form: is there a word limit per question, and is it word or character limited?
Thank you for asking this one. Yes, there is a suggested word count, so it's word, not character. We left it quite broad. We hope that the limits will serve as a guide. We know that working with word counts or character counts can be difficult. It makes crafting your application a little bit harder. We don't want you to think that you have to meet the word count. So if you can do it in fewer words, great, but you can't exceed it. And that is really to provide a little bit of equity across applications. We want everyone to have the same amount of space to tell us their story, to tell us the things that they want to know. And we also hope it really encourages the applicants to focus on what's the most important thing to tell us.
Mm-hmm. Great. Back to some services questions. Could funding be used to cover salary for a nurse practitioner for services such as MAT?
Yes.
Okay. Do we anticipate that the awards will be spread evenly across the different areas that we've mentioned, like prevention, harm reduction, treatment, recovery?
We certainly hope to have equitable distribution across all of those. And I'll also just sort of add a little bit of an add-on to recovery, which you'll see in the application as family and trauma supports too. It depends on what we receive, but we certainly hope that we can spread it across all of the categories. And we also want to make sure that we're thinking about geography as well, so that we have fair distribution across the state.
Mm-hmm. Great. Another question about financial eligibility that maybe one you suggest an email for, but just to ask it here. For some folks who anticipate possible growth, say in the year or 2 years ahead, if they receive an award and then future years of growth push them past the current limits in terms of annual budget, will that be a problem?
No, I don't think so. I certainly hope that's the case. That would be a good problem to have. So let's talk about that. If it's something that you know to be the case, that you already know that you're getting the funding, if you could let us know about it, we can certainly work with you and figure out the best process to apply.
Great. Back to services. Can the grant be used to assist a community organization grow into an aftercare recovery house?
Yes, I don't see any sort of reason why it wouldn't, but yes.
A question related to how this grant making is targeting communities that have been impacted by disproportionate impact of overdose rates and deaths. How will the reviewers be determining what qualifies as that disproportionality for
That's the great question. So that's a little bit of the review that we will do internally at RIZE using DPH's numbers about overdose rates. So we can, they'll be releasing their most current numbers, I think, in mid-June. So that's probably what we'll be using to determine priority areas that have had high overdose rates.
Mhm. Will there be different project-oriented grant opportunities in the future? And will organizations that win this round be eligible for those future competitions?
We believe that the third round, so the round that I mentioned that will be launching in early January for funding in the spring of 2025, will either be program-based or population-based, so a little bit different than this round. This round is very focused on general operating support and capacity building. But we want to learn from this round, and we want to sort of understand what's happening in the field to make sure that we're targeting the dollars where they'll have the most impact. So I believe that third round will be either program-based or population-specific, and we have not made a determination yet if organizations that are funded in this round can be funded again.
Mhm. Okay. An eligibility question. Do partnerships with religious organizations qualify, or must community-based organizations only work by itself?
So some religious organizations have a 501c3 number. And if they do, they're eligible to apply. So that will be the deciding factor on that.
Mhm. Okay. Another question is for a nonprofit that only incorporated recently, say in 2023, and is still a startup nonprofit, are they eligible?
Absolutely. And congratulations to starting up. Yes, you may be one of those organizations that doesn't have audited financials, but please get in touch with us. We can work with you if you have a P&L or some other documentation. We just want to, understand the financial stability of the organization and your sources of revenue and expenses. So we're happy to, work with you to figure out how we can best do that. But yes, absolutely eligible.
Mhm. Great. A question about the funding thresholds came through, and I'm trying to think about the best way to ask this, but if you could talk, Julie, maybe about the thinking behind the funding thresholds in terms of how much you can apply for based on size, especially given that this is a capacity building grant. Folks would just like a little more information about that.
Yes, this is a great question and something that we put a lot of thought into. So we want to make sure that we can fund as many organizations as possible. And the goal of the program is to target small community-based organizations. So that we started with defining small. And we, as Jen said, we have 3 categories: small, grassroots, small, and medium. So we capped it at $5 million for medium, which under, other structures might not be, those might be considered grassroots. But we really wanted to make sure that we were giving everybody an opportunity to apply for this funding. And then the funding, suggested funding limit, so up to 50,000 for grassroots, 100, and then 150 or 30% of your budget, is based on really industry standards. Most funders will not do general operating support above 10 to 15% of an operating budget. So we wanted to make sure that we went far beyond that and went up to 30%. And the thinking behind that is you want to make sure that the organization has the capacity to actually spend the money in the time period. So you need to spend your first year money in year one to be eligible for funding for year two. So that was a lot of thinking behind that. And as I said, we want to make sure that we can fund as many organizations as possible. And we believed that by setting these guidelines, that will help us determine the most equitable spread with the money. I know we've had some feedback already that this could be challenging for some of the smaller organizations, but I invite you to reach out to us. We can speak more specifically with you about what your needs are and see if there's a way to figure out, something that's helpful to you. I will also say that this is not the only round of funding, and not the only funding out there. So this particular program is set up, as I said, general operating support, which, as Kristen mentioned, is a rarity. There are not a lot of funders who will do general operating support, and it's usually capped between 10 and 15%. There's the municipal round that will be happening in the fall, and many municipalities are doing grant programs. The city of Boston has one open right now for community-based organizations. So I would suggest that you take a look at that. And if you're not in the city of Boston, check to see what your municipality is doing with their funds. And then, RIZE always has other opportunities open.
Great. A question about partnerships. Could you share any insights into how an educational institution might partner with a community organization to apply for a grant?
It would have to be a community organization that fits within the grant criteria. So that they would have to be the funded entity or the applicant. And if they chose to partner with an educational institution, which is certainly a laudable goal, I'm sure that there's ways to figure out like how the funding would flow or how the partnership would work. But if you have something a little bit more specific, please get in touch and we can try to work through that with you.
Great. I just want to acknowledge, I think maybe 3 more questions I have to ask. And so if you are holding on to any other questions, please submit them in the Q&A so we can try to get to them before 2 o'clock. So next question, Julie, is if an organization asks for the maximum amount that they can apply for, is it possible that the request might be adjusted and partially funded during the review process?
It is possible. It is very possible. We will review we are not asking for a budget. I think that, I don't know that we said that specifically, but we're not asking for a budget. But we're asking you to describe how the funds are being used. If that doesn't really match up with the goals that you identify, so say you wanted to increase your staff by 2, but you asked for funding for a car. If the 2 things don't match up, we might come back to you with questions about, does the funding really support your goals? But we certainly hope that we will be able to honor people's requests.
Okay. Related question from the same person. Could an organization request different amounts per year?
You certainly could, but we'd want to know sort of the thinking behind that. So absolutely.
Right. Can we share with folks who might not know how to find data on the opioid epidemic to create a compelling case for their area?
Yes, on our website, on the Mosaic page on the website, I mentioned 2 resources. One is the ORF strategic plan, the other is the allowable activities, and the third is a link to the state's data. And that might be a good place for you to start to see what the overdose rates are in your town or region. And also they cut the data a number of different ways.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. We may have spoken to this, but just to make sure we do, have you decided on how many grants that we'll be giving out total for this round of funding?
We won't know until we know how many applications we get and sort of how the grants are falling within the different categories.
Great. Could this grant support creating a safe space or center for recoveries to receive recovery coaching?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. I believe we have covered the questions that we've received. I think we can wait just a minute or two. If I missed your question, please chat right away and say you forgot me. Or we still have a couple of minutes that we could accept a couple questions. And just a reminder again, if I imagine folks will have more questions as you start this work, and there are office hours ahead, which you can find more information about on the RIZE website. I'll also say now, just while we wait another minute for any final questions, that as you exit this webinar room, you'll be prompted to please fill out a brief evaluation form. It's really important for us to have your feedback about the usefulness of this webinar, and that'll be another opportunity for you to submit questions that are maybe still on your mind. And then some of those questions will be part of the Q&A that we post on the website. I did get one other question, Julie. Will we be informed if we are not funded?
Yes, you will be informed via email if you are not funded around the same time that the organizations that will fund.
Great. All right. Just one follow-up question. Could we add anything further to the comment around educational partnering with a community organization? I don't know if there's a lot more to say at this point.
No, I don't. I don't. You know, it would be up to the applying organization who would want to apply with an educational institution. So without
Mhm.
knowing what that partnership might look like, I'm not really sure I can answer, but please feel free to get in touch with us. We're happy to work through that with you.
Great. I think we could probably consider it closed, Julie, if you'd like to say any closing words.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you again for your time this afternoon. Please get in touch with us. Please take a look at the application. The application questions are also included in the guidelines so that you don't have to get into the application form if you don't want to. We did our level best to make sure it was accessible, and we want to make sure that you're spending time doing the work that you do every day, saving lives and helping people instead of trying to work through a complicated application. So if you have feedback, don't hesitate to give it to us. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for. And we hope that if you are looking for more information, you'll join us for our office hours.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.